G'day everyone, Tom Walley here, General Manager of Corporate Traveller, and I am really thrilled today to be joined by a couple of people. One face in particular will be very familiar to a lot of you, Gerard Murphy and Paul Roos from Performance by Design. G'day guys.
Hey, Tom.
Great. Now these guys have come up with an amazing concept called the Culture Couch, and I'm very lucky to be a guest today. So I'm going to hand over to Roosy, who's going to run the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about culture and all things associated with that. Roosy.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, Performance by Design, and welcome to the Culture Couch with my co-host, Gerard Murphy. For those, we'll just give you a little bit of a background. Performance by Design, who's doing work with Corporate Traveller. What we work on is purpose, values, but more importantly, behaviours. So we really try and break down culture in a really simple form. And we work with all size companies, from the small, medium business, I know which you guys deal with, and a lot of those people will be listening right now, to some of the bigger companies. But for us, and Murph, I'll get you to jump in straight away. For us, what we see a lot is a lot of companies have a purpose and values, but really don't understand what's beneath that. And by that, I'd say, let's say integrity, the three of us come up with a value and it's integrity. Integrity might mean something slightly different to you, Tom, than what it does to Gerard. So what we try and do is break that down, and we try and say, well, what does integrity look like? And we spend a lot of time in that space. And we're going to go over some of those concepts with you today, Tom. But Murph, do you want to jump in on that and just maybe give your little spiel on what you've done? Because you've been in this space for the best part of 20 years. And then we can put Tom under the microscope and we can grill him.
Well, look forward to that. Yeah, absolutely, Rosie. The truth about behaviours, they're very simple. It's about how you behave, how others behave. And so working with teams, leaders, sporting teams, corporate teams, it doesn't matter which team, to help them identify what it is that we want to reward and challenge within our team is so powerful. It takes a little while to work through what is a behaviour and what does it look like. But once you get to that point, it becomes much easier for the leaders to reward and challenge the inappropriate.
Yeah, fantastic, Murph. So, Tom, hopefully we'll, as we work through the next sort of 35 minutes, we'll get to be more specific around those concepts. But I want to sort of take you back over your journey. I think it's been about 17 years with the Flight Centre Group, including some time in the UK. Probably the first two questions would be, what have you learned about leadership along the way? And secondary to that, did you find a big difference between the culture in the UK to the culture in Australia?
Yeah, I might start with that one first then, actually, Rosie. So the UK is interesting, and I'm sure you've all spent time there over the years. And I lived over there, as you mentioned. I started out my flight centre career over there. I had spent the first 10 years of my career there. And Aussies have an interesting reputation in the UK, usually one for hard work, but also one for a bit of larrikinism. And I think what I found in the UK is a bit more conservative as a general rule, and the business community is a bit more conservative. The flight centre culture over there, I guess we brought a hint of Australianism to it. And we spent a lot of time trying to actually work out what the hell that was many years later. What was our culture and how do we define it? And we did define it almost as Australian, which is sort of like fun and savvy and a little bit cheeky. I think for a while we had a cultural icon as Bob Hawke was kind of represented who we looked like.
Yeah.
Which I guess as someone of my age, that was a big part of my youth, was someone like him. But I reckon it gave us a bit of an edge, to be honest, mate. Over there, we took that Australian culture to the UK. We had a few Aussies working there initially, but more than anything, we kind of tried to pass that on to our British colleagues, and they loved it, as most people do. Most people like having fun at work, treading lightly, and having a bit of being willing to take the mickey out of each other and get more importantly, just getting stuff done. And I think Aussies are generally pretty good at that. So I think that conservative culture that was in the British working environment, and even our customers and in suppliers and people we work with, that really bringing that Aussieism kind of really gave us an edge. And we won a lot of business off the fact that people just thought they believed we were pretty genuine. They believed we would get stuff done for them. They believed we were very open and honest, and we were pretty savvy with what we did. So I guess, what did I learn out of leadership? I learned that being able to fail is really important. Flight Centre is very good at providing that culture. Screw, who's our CEO and founder, who still works there, he's a big proponent of allowing people to, I won't use the word that he uses, but to stuff up. And not be any major consequences other than a bit of mockery for that. Obviously, if you do it continuously, it probably doesn't bode too well for your career. But as a general rule, being allowed to fail gives you the confidence to have a go. And I guess that's one of the other things I've learned then as a leader is to go, if there's something we reckon we can have a go at, let's have a go at that, as long as there's an exit door if it's not going particularly well and you can try something else. That's a good thing. And I guess the biggest thing, and I think this comes from, I suppose it's probably a bit who I am, but it also comes as a learning is, again, the company's very good at allowing this, is vulnerability. And vulnerability is I think is a really, and I hear a lot of leaders talk about it, and I probably wasn't able to recognize it until relatively recently as a leader, but it's just about being genuine and authentic. And if things are tough, let people know they're tough. It's okay. If things are good, people will recognize that as well. And I think that's a big part that I've learned throughout the years, that actually being yourself and being vulnerable when you want to be vulnerable is really, really important as a leader, and recognizing that's a good thing.
One of the things I just want to pick up there, Tom, is really interesting, because we talk about everyone's got a culture, and I'm fascinated when you talked about that Australianism. Did you articulate that? Because one of the themes that we talk about, Murph, isn't it, is we don't leave culture to chance. Yeah. How did you articulate that Australianism to your customers? Did you put it down on a piece of paper, or did it just naturally evolve because you had Australians working there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I kind of alluded to it a bit there. We only just, literally in the last 2 or 3 years, we actually put that on paper. And we did it with a session with a guy, a marketing professor, actually he's based in Melbourne as well, by the name of Mark Ritson. I don't know if you're aware of Mark, but he has this session that we do around DNA. And we did it was a couple of days worth of workshops with him, with all the leaders in Flight Centre from around the globe. We got here together in Brisbane over a weekend, and including Screw, our founder. And it was all about telling the story about where we came from as a company, and then what was important to us. And we did a whole bunch of breakouts and workshops around what that could be. And when you trace our roots right the way back to where Flight Centre started, which before Flight Centre was a company called Top Deck, which still exists, which is a coach touring company now in Europe. And Screw and his mates started that company essentially because they wanted to have fun, see Europe, drink a bit, and share the costs. And that was kind of that was where it all came from. And out of that was born things like ownership. So they were each given they grew a business to be Top Deck Travel, and each bus was essentially owned by a driver, and it was their responsibility to make sure that bus looked good, ran well. They had to be mechanics as well as tour guides, as well as so on and so forth. Another one was egalitarianism, and that was about everyone having the same opportunities, and that was about that came from sharing a bus and everyone mucking in and doing the cooking and the like. And the third one was irreverence, and irreverence was, which if you look up irreverence in the dictionary, it's not great. It sort of says you don't give a stuff. But it was really about us taking our business. We defined it as us taking our business seriously, but not ourselves. And that for us really started to galvanize what our culture was and what our core values were within our culture. And then, as I mentioned, off that spun this Australianism, which was this kind of larrikin style behaviour. And Bob Hawke was genuinely put up as a potential visual hammer for that, because all of us, including all the Brits, and most of the Americans knew who he was. The Americans knew from Australia too in 1983, and the Brits knew who he was because of who he was. And he everyone, when they saw that, they went, yeah, I get it. I understand who you are. You're this sort of fun, savvy, slightly larrikin, slightly irreverent type of person, but you get stuff done, you make change, and that was kind of how it was. But that was only a recent thing. We've had philosophies in our business for 25 years, and those words have been used within that. But that sort of, I guess, distilling down of our core culture was only something we've done recently.
Murph, can I bring you in on this? Because it's a really important point, Tom, for the SMEs that you deal with. Often, well, most of the time, they are small family businesses, aren't they? The sort of offshoots of bigger companies that they start. But one of the biggest mistakes they make, Murph, is not articulating what those values are that Tom just mentioned then, from the guys that just want to travel and have fun and all that sort of stuff. It is one of the biggest mistakes that small, medium businesses make, isn't it? What's your advice to them in terms of articulating those values that are probably there and most people sort of know what they are, but then all of a sudden they get too big and you've got, to use the Swans analogy, the no dickheads policy, suddenly you've got all these dickheads running around your company because you've never articulated those behaviours and values.
Yeah, I think it links to Tom's point earlier around safety. So it's really hard to reward and challenge unless you make it overt and you articulate what it looks like. Because then, as you said earlier, my honest isn't your honest necessarily. So when I challenge you around, hey, Roosie, that was dishonest, we've got no common ground. We haven't defined it in terms of behaviours. So taking the time to articulate it and make it overt is really powerful, because it then allows everybody to sort of have the conversation. Okay, what is discipline? What does discipline look like? What does irreverence look like? Because that could easily be misconstrued, Tom. So having clarity around that from a behavioural perspective is really important to creating safety. And I think that sort of leads me to a question for you, Tom, is you talk about safety, you talk about vulnerability. They're sort of buzzwords, I think, in leadership now. Like it's unfortunate when things as important as vulnerability and safety, they become used by everyone who don't necessarily understand what they mean, I don't think. Can you talk us through how you create safety? Because one of the things we find in sport, and Roosie will probably back this up in a moment, is that really high-performing cultures are a paradox because they are very, very honest. So people are told when they're not doing the right thing, but at the same time, despite that really honest communication, they are very safe environments. And it's sort of the yin and the yang in some ways.
It's a good question. How do you create? So if your question is how do you create that vulnerability? I reckon all I could really comment on that is, one, it has to start with me. So I pretty much, as a leader, wear my heart on my sleeve. If I'm feeling down, I'm down. If I'm up, I'm up. People will know generally how I am or how I feel about a decision. I'm not very good at hiding that. Sometimes to my detriment, unfortunately, and sometimes not great at towing a company line if something annoys me. But I think if people feel that they can comment and not lose their job or get in trouble for it or act in a way that or they feel that they can act genuinely, they're going to have to see that in their leader first. It's a really hard line to tread though, because sometimes, I'm not the boss of Flights in a Travel Group. That's the CEO, and sometimes you, as a leader, or as a member, as an employee in a business, you have to toe a company line. You have to just accept that's what's going to go on. And sometimes you have to just keep a front up and go, well, this is what we're doing. And look, this current environment is a great example where we're having to do lots of really horrible things. And, we've stood down a lot of our staff and everyone knows it's terrible. And we're all, certainly being as honest as we have ever been with our staff around the future and what we can do. But sometimes you have to do things that you go, look, this is just the way it is, and you may not agree with it. And that, as a bit like you're saying with sporting teams, it kind of plays against vulnerability, or it plays against safety, because you're having to just hold a line. And I'm struggling a bit with that sometimes at the moment, because there's the way the company is having to go, given the circumstances, is not how we've run it for 38 years. And this time at the moment is a really tough time to be a leader in many ways, because you're having to do things that often go against your values and against who you are as a person to survive. And everyone understands that, but no one likes it and changes their view of who you are and what they're allowed to do. So safety's a really tough one at the moment, because everyone's feeling bloody nervous about their jobs. So people are keeping their heads down and go, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to say anything untoward that might lead me down a bad path. Yeah.
Can I just pick that up then?
Yep.
Have you, when we talk to people about giving feedback, having conversations, we talk about examples, use behaviours, give examples. Can you talk us through a time in the, you must have had some terrible days in the last two months, I guess. What, you've dropped 98%. I get your weekly email, so I've been reading those. Yeah. Talk us through some of the experiences or the examples you've had in that time, almost your darkest moments, I guess, and how you got through those, and what leadership characteristics you had to display, and probably coming out of it, what you've learnt about yourself and leadership.
Oh, look, it's probably a pretty easy question to answer in a lot of ways. The moment is anyway. The darkest day was the day we had to tell our staff that we were standing them down, and we stood down in the corporate traveller business. We stood down 80% of people on one day, and I did it via Zoom like this, and we had 450 people on a Zoom, and I had to tell them all. I made sure I wanted my camera on, and I didn't want it to be an email. I wanted them to hear it out of my mouth, that what we were doing and why we were doing it. Didn't sleep much the night before, and got on that call. And to be perfectly honest with you, Gerard, I pretty much cried my way through the whole thing. It was hideous, and it was hideous for a number of reasons. One is all you can picture is people's heads, people's faces that getting news that they were, until further notice, not going to be paid. At that point, there was no JobKeeper in Australia. Yeah. So it was literally, we're standing you down effective Monday. This was on a Friday, and on a Thursday rather. We're standing down effective Monday, and we don't know what the future is, and we don't know how you're going to get paid. If you've got some annual leave, use it. If you've got some long service leave, use it. And we're really sorry. That was essentially the nuts and bolts of it. Fortunately, within a week, the government came out with a JobKeeper allowance, and that kind of helped, and that made us all feel significantly better. But at the time, all I could picture was people's faces that I've known for the last 18 years in the company. All I could picture was all the amazing parties and celebrations I'd been at, and awards I'd given to people, and stages I'd stood on and congratulated and hugged people. And it was really horrible. It was like a life flashing before your eyes moment. And I was a mess, to be perfectly honest. I really was. I struggled through it. And I for the first time in a number of years, I'd actually written notes for myself about the call. I generally just I know what's in my head, and I work through dot points in my head and it comes out. But I'd actually written notes because I knew I had this feeling I would really struggle. And I got through it, and then hung the phone up, and then just completely lost it. And one of my colleagues who I worked with for years was on the Zoom, and I was in the building at the time, and she was in the building, and she knew where I was, and she came down and gave me a big hug, and that was all really nice. But I guess, look, in a weird way, I think it helped people take the news, because they could see just how horrendous it was for all of us. And it wasn't a decision that anyone wanted to make. It's the last thing you want to do, is get on a call with all your people and tell them they don't have a job. I mean, it was awful. But I think it helped people digest the news that it wasn't coming from a corporate, this is what, it's not coming from a CFO, and this is the ruling, and suck it up. It probably in a weird way summarized in visual form our culture. Of caring about our people, of taking ownership for the decision, of being real and being authentic about what you do. And I think a lot of people did come afterwards and go, look, that's why we love working here, because we generally feel our leaders give a shit about us, and that makes us be able to cope with this better. And I think, and we can go on about this for hours. It's changed a lot since, obviously, as this has gone on, and people's feelings change about that. But that's a conversation for another time. But that was probably in the recent times, that was the darkest day by a mile. And I guess it was, and I wasn't alone. I know that I spoke to lots of people in other parts of the business who had to deliver a similar message to their people. And I think all of us were the same. We all just felt a bits and didn't really know. We'd never had to do it before, and we didn't really know how to handle it. But I think our people took it in a way that was, this is who we are. We are this culture. We do care about our people. So it had a nice, weird silver lining.
And it's interesting, Tom, because I think it's a really important point you're making, because one of the things I've heard in the last month is, how do you think such and such acted under pressure, etc. If you're waiting for pressure to change your culture or change your behaviours, it's too late.
Yeah.
That's the importance of culture. The culture is built over time. Trust is built over time. So these things that, Murph, you touched on before, these buzzwords, you've got to really understand what they are. Empowerment, relationships, leadership, culture. And if you have a really good understanding of what they are, then when it comes to the tough times, you've built your set of behaviours, you've created really strong relationships with your people, you've been vulnerable in front of your people, and they generally feel like you care for them. You can't just wait for a virus for that to happen, because you have to build trust over time. Take that point of trust, and in your own words, what does that look like, and how important that is to build a great culture?
Yeah, look, trust is obviously massive. There's the amount of people who said over time you don't just demand trust, you earn it, and so on and so forth. But the only thing I really can find in building trust over time has been being consistent. So trying to, if you are consistent with people across the board, generally you get their trust. Following them up, as in, if they've asked you to do something, actually go and do it, and then follow them up so they know that when they tell you something, you're going to do something about it. And look, and again, I think a lot of this comes back to the personality of the leader in some respects, but we're very good at this as a company, I would say, as a general rule. We do care about our people. We do spend as much time on their personal lives as we do on their work lives. And a lot of trust comes from making sure you're looking after your people outside of their day-to-day job. If someone's in strife, if someone's kid's got an issue, or their partner, or they need to do something, affording them that time to be able to deal with that, texting them, calling them, checking in on them, generally people feel, and rightly so, that you've got their back, and that because we do care about our people, and if you do care about them, that they can start putting their trust in you. But it's work. You have to actually work at it. You can't just expect people to trust. And when you've got hundreds of staff or thousands of staff, it is hard work. It's something you got to work at daily. And I over the years I've used prompts to kind of help me as well. Like I'll put things in. If someone ever, and I still do this now, if someone ever mentions anywhere on a call their birthday, someone else's birthday, their kid's birthday, their kid's going into hospital, whatever the hell it is, stick it in your diary. Stick it in your diary. Text Roosie, his wife's going into hospital tomorrow. Little things like that, because you can't remember everything, right? And I think those little things really help to build a relationship, because you're not going to like everyone you work with. I'm pretty lucky here at Flight Centre. We do generally get along with everyone, which is really nice. But you're going to have to find ways to work with people, and you're not necessarily going to gel, but things like that. I worked for a leader years ago who, in fact, it wasn't a leader, it was my headmaster at school. And on my very first day of high school in Perth, he came up to me, 6'4", wherever he was, in his black robes, and he said, and he grabbed my shoulder and he said, "Tom, how are you?" And I literally, was my first day at school. I was like, how the hell does this guy know who I am? And he told me years later, when I was a prefect at the school, that he had physically gone and he walked around and asked his offsider, "Who's that guy over there?" And I loved that man from the minute I met him to the day I left school and beyond, just because he knew what my name was when I went on my first day at school.
It's a really, really simple message, isn't it? Murph, I'm going to bring you on that, because I think one of the things people have a misconception about what a footy club looks like. And for those who don't know, Gerard Murphy worked with Geelong from 2007, and you can tell a bit of the story. But one of the things I want you to pick up, Murph, is what Tom said then. It's not just about kicking someone's ass. It's about then wrapping your arms around them. And I think footy clubs sometimes get a bum deal for, Jared Roughhead disciplined Luke Hodge, or Stevie J got suspended for 6 weeks or something like that. But it's not as simple as that. A great culture then says, you've done something wrong and we're going to help you. Do you want to take us inside some of those more public conversations that have already taken place? Because we don't want to betray anyone's trust. But that is a super important part of what Tom's talking about, isn't it?
100%. I think there's a couple of things there, Ruzi. The first one is I think we have to catch people doing it right first, because too often we catch people doing it wrong. So if we can continue to reward those that are doing it well, and we always sort of talk about 4 to 1, 4 goods, because often when people do it well, we just let it go. We don't say well done. The second thing is the easy part is giving the feedback. So it's easy to give someone feedback that you haven't done it well, but then the hardest part is to support them through it. And we always talk, Tom, this builds enormous trust. Give the feedback, help them with a plan, and then support them through that plan. Because if you can support them through that plan and provide the care that they need in order to get where they need to go and change their behaviour, then you build enormous safety and trust through that process. So I think your message around consistency is really important. People need consistency in their leadership. If you're getting consistent leaders, it's really difficult, really difficult.
Yeah. What about, Tom, on that? How do you sort of select and develop leaders? Because it's fantastic. The message that you're giving today is the space we live in, Murph, isn't it? All about vulnerability and consistency and feedback and little and often conversations. Yep. But I suppose one of the challenges we see, Tom, in the work that we do with small and medium businesses, there is a dearth of leadership. And I say that respectfully because it becomes more transactional than it is relationship based or competency rather than character. How do you try and develop and select your leaders within your organisation?
Oh God, look, it's really hard to do. And I think this one's the trait I look for is initiative generally. So, and it's becoming, and maybe it's more topical than it's true, but it seems to be becoming more so the case these days. You just got to look a bit harder. As your company gets bigger, you definitely have to look harder. And there's a general assumption from those of us who are over the age of 45 that, that the younger generation are just lazy and not doing anything. The reality is it's not true. You just got to look harder. Yeah. And they just do it differently, to be honest. It used to be if you wanted to show initiative, you sent a memo to the boss or something. But these days they put a comment on social media or whatever it might be. But I've always looked for initiative and people who go, I'm thinking about, I've just been looking at this and here's an idea, and I'll generally go, that sounds amazing. Why don't you come present something to me, or why don't you write something up for me and let's have a chat about it. And Maling is a good example of that. She's got great initiative and generally says, I'm thinking about doing this. And I think the more you have good young people with initiative, then the next phase of that is you give them ownership. And you go, okay, that sounds brilliant. I love what you're saying. Why don't you take ownership of that and present it up? And if you can put them in a forum where they feel that they are actually getting some airtime in front of some senior people and/or they genuinely own something, I find as 9 times out of 10 people rise to that. They love it. And if they're not going to rise to it, they don't take it on and you don't see them again. It's hard as a leader to spot young people because often I find, and I'm guilty of this, very guilty of this, you look for people that are like you. And that's often not what you want. My team I have now is amazing. They're all very diverse. We've got very, very different personality types, which is brilliant. It's exactly what you want in a team. And you know that as a leader. But then when you're looking for leaders, you tend to just naturally associate with people that you think the same way as. So that's probably one of the traps I've fallen into, is I tend to hunt down clones of myself, which is not a good thing because I have plenty of faults and you need people that are different to me as well. But
I think I like your 3 points there, mate. You've almost got in your head a little plan for how to identify a leader. That look for initiative, give them ownership, and then promote and train them. Yeah. I think even though you may or may not have that written down, in your head it's pretty clear, and I think that's a fantastic message for other people, because often when we ask that question, Paul, the answer isn't as clear or obvious.
I appreciate you summarising it back, Jared, because that's pretty much how it works. And I find we have a great culture here where people will put their head up And it's one of the things I said I'm struggling with at the moment is people putting their head down because they're a bit nervous. And that culture has promoted. Well, let me ask you that question back. How do you do it in a footy team?
Yeah, I think we train them. And I think to your point, Tom, it's a really good point. I think you can't just leave it to accident. You can't just leave it to chance. I think the whole footy club was flipped on its head with what Sydney did in 2003 and then Gerard with Geelong. What it became is a pretty simple formula of this is the way we want to behave. We talked about the Bloods culture. We had a 2-day seminar. We came up with our behaviours and then we picked our leadership group based on those behaviours. So it wasn't ambiguous. And out of that, it was a real leap of faith. So through that, we had about 8-man leadership group and Stewie Maxfield became captain. And then I want you to talk a bit about more empowerment because it's funny, that's another word that people talk about. Empowerment is giving people responsibility. But so many leaders don't want to give responsibility, don't want to give their own power away. So then how do you empower people? Go on, Murph. Yeah.
I was going to jump in there just to build on your points, Rizzy, because they're great points. Often we promote through competency as opposed to character.
Yeah.
So people that are good at their job, they get promoted, and that's almost the opposite of what we would say. You need people who are good at their job, but you need people that live the behaviours first. And I think if you get that clarity around behaviours, then that becomes super important. And that's the empowerment piece. Then I think leaders are often okay at giving or empowering people when there's no pressure.
Yeah.
But when the heat comes on, I think that's when leaders often find it really difficult and go, the moment's too big, let me take it back. And I think that's where good leadership's really tested.
And I think you're right, Matt. But that's the power of a simple system. I mean, you've articulated it really well, Tom. A simple system allows a clarity around how we're going to act. A simple system of rewarding 4 to 1, positive to negative, as you mentioned, Murph. Well done, well done, well done. Okay, hang on. No, we don't do it that way. A simple system of vulnerability, of wrapping your arms around people and saying, look, I will help you get better. I think it's a really, really important thing. And that really was the transformational in a footy sense. It became a really simple formula. And the ones that follow it under pressure, Murph, to your point, and don't go away from it are the ones that have been successful. If you look at AFL, like I was under pressure with Demetrio in 2005, we stuck to the guns. Bomber Thompson there was an end of year review with Cookie. Bomber kept his job. Clarko was under pressure early in his career, et cetera, et cetera. So the ones that weather that storm of pressure and stick to that simple system, Tom, that you've articulated, are the ones that ultimately become successful. I know we've got a short amount of time left, Tom, but I want to talk to you about the other thing which you've sort of articulated, but leaders have to be role models, first and foremost. Tell us a bit about your personal brand and perhaps how much time you spend on yourself and what you value and what you behave, and maybe looking forward to the headstone. I always talk about this with leaders, and Murph, you do as well. What do you want written on your headstone, in terms of leadership? What do you want people to remember you as? Because I think it's a really important point, Murph, perhaps to finish on. The leader has to have a personal brand. The leader, and I'll finish with Michael Jordan's quote. Those who haven't seen The Last Dance, it's unbelievable vision. And he said, I didn't ask anyone to do anything I didn't do myself, which is fundamentally what we talk about role modeling. But Tom, for you, what would you like to be on your leadership headstone?
Oh, geez. Okay. I guess what's always been, if I go to my values, what's really important to me, I did an exercise a while back and I hadn't done one in years, to be honest. And it sort of distilled down that the 2 things most important to me in life were family and humour. And I lost my mum early on in my life, or early-ish on in my life, in my late teens. And it wasn't a conscious decision to do this, but I think subconsciously over the last sort of 25, 30 years, it's made me take life a little lighter. And I think, people often talk, you only get one shot at life and that sort of stuff. Not so much that, it's more just, there are bigger issues in life. And I think coming to work should be fun. I've happened to land in a great company that allows that, which is nice. But I think it should be fun. It's something you do these days, 6/7 of your life. I mean, you're constantly plugged into this ecosystem now with mobile phones and wherever else you want to be. So I'd like to be remembered as someone who was a great collaborator with their people, that kept work entertaining, fun, and engaging for everyone. But above all, was a decent bloke who really cared about his people and didn't usually thought about what they wanted more than he thought about what he wanted. I spend limited time on myself, and that's something I want to change as a leader. I think there's development I need personally and professionally that I should do more of. But I love seeing people succeed, and I've learned a lot from my children in terms of giving them ownership. It's been a big part of how I've developed as a leader, because, as you know, with kids, you kind of got to let them go, and then they learn, and that's taught me a lot as a leader. And I think that has allowed me to create that more, to give people empowerment over their roles. So I guess I'd like to be remembered as a decent bloke who cared about their people, who collaboratively worked together to improve everyone's work life to be more fun and engaging, and give them more empowerment over their roles. That's a pretty big headstone you're gonna have to make for me.
Can I just ask one question before we finish up, Roosy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Knowing what you know now, Tom, what advice would you give to a young Tom?
I think the thing that I'm always aware of as a leader that I need to improve on is quick decision making. And I have one of these brains that can see every angle of every argument. I think if you've ever done Myers-Briggs or one of those, I'm an ENTP, and I'm a very strong P, and I conceptualize everything. And I can see every angle. And whilst I'm comfortable with it personally, I know it frustrates the crap out of other people. So I would give myself advice to trust my gut a bit more and make decisions quickly, because often as a leader, sometimes people just want a decision. They can totally see the arguments and they get it, and I've learned that at pace in the last 2 months. At absolute pace, is they're like, what's the answer? Because often it's their future that's hinging on that decision. So I would give myself that advice. I'd probably also give myself the advice to not beat myself up for wrong decisions. I think I've learned that over time, but you're always so conscious of making the wrong one that you don't make one. So both of those bits of advice are generally around decision making. I think lots of other things I've learned throughout it that hopefully my younger self would learn as they became an older self.
Well, mate, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Tom. But I think the biggest compliment we can give you guys is we were having a discussion around what the leaders that we work with, and we were only having that discussion about an hour ago, Murph, and what we spoke about, and I don't want to embarrass anyone, so I won't mention names, but the people that we're working within your organisation were at the top of the list, the absolute top of the list of our leadership chart in terms of what we see as leaders. So that's a credit to you, mate, and a credit to the people within the organisation that we love working with you. I talk about it all the time. Some people can talk the talk. Well, most people can talk the talk. Very few people can walk the walk. And at your organisation, what we see of you guys is you walk the walk. So fantastic, mate. We've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Murph. And Tom, I might hand it back over to you to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you, Murph. Thanks, Rosie. Look, that was fantastic. Really enjoyed that. And thanks for the compliments too. And I look, plenty of people who have worked for me over the years and work for me now have done plenty of work with you guys. And I won't mention names either, but they've loved it all. And you've taught us plenty of stuff as well. So thank you. And thanks for this last 35, 40 minutes. I hope it's, for those watching, I hope it's been really informative. It's been great to be interrogated by two legends of sport, and thank you for the links back to the sport as well. And Rosie, it was a pleasure watching you play footy all over those years and coach as well. So I really appreciate your time, guys, and looking forward to working more with you over the next few years.
Sorry, Tom, I didn't realise you were that old.
Black and white TV back then.
Right, remember that? Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Well done. That's really good.
Thanks, mate. See ya.